You think you know what strength is? Let me show you what real strength means. Jack Harris's voice was steady, his words hanging in the air like a challenge. The group of teenagers around him snickered, their laughter cutting through the cool air of the park. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Standing around him, their youthful arrogance seemed to magnify as they eyed the frail, old man sitting quietly on the bench. Mark, the tallest of the group, smirked and stepped closer. "What, are you some kind of retired soldier or something?" he asked, his voice dripping with mockery. Jack didn't respond. He just stared ahead, his pale blue eyes steady, unwavering. Mark nudged his friend Dave. "Come on, let's see if this old man can still move," he said, his words like a dare. The challenge hung in the air, the tension building as the group closed in. Mark stepped forward and, with a cocky grin, tossed a set of dumbbells onto the ground in front of Jack. "Let's see if you can lift these." "But you can't even pick them up." Jack didn't flinch. He simply watched them, his hands resting on his knees. For a moment, it looked like he wouldn't react at all. But then, just as Mark opened his mouth to mock him again, Jack spoke, his voice low and calm. "I don't need to lift those to show you strength," he said. "Real strength is in here," he added, tapping his chest lightly. The group fell silent for a moment, unsure of how to respond to his quiet confidence. Mark's eyes narrowed, but he wasn't ready to back down. "Okay, old man," he said, the sneer back on his face. "Prove it. What kind of strength do you have, huh?" Jack didn't reply. Instead, he stood slowly, his joints creaking as he pushed himself to his feet. The teens watched him closely, expecting him to struggle, to falter. But he didn't. Jack stood tall, his back straight despite the years, and with deliberate steps, he walked past them, heading toward the park's basketball court. Mark and his friends followed him, their curiosity piqued now. They couldn't understand why this old man, with his frail frame, wasn't intimidated. When they reached the court, Jack turned to face them. "Strength isn't always about muscles," he said. "It's about perseverance. It's about never giving up, no matter the odds." Mark scoffed, not believing a word. "Yeah, okay, Grandpa. Let's see you do anything impressive." Jack didn't answer. Instead, he bent down and picked up a basketball. He dribbled it with ease, the motion smooth and controlled. His movements were far from slow. He shot a perfect basket without breaking a sweat. The teens were speechless. Jack didn't stop there. He kept moving, practicing the shots, each one landing perfectly in the hoop. Mark stood frozen, unable to take his eyes off the old man who had just shown them up. The group's bravado evaporated in the face of Jack's quiet, effortless strength. Just as they were starting to feel the sting of their humiliation, another figure appeared at the edge of the court. It was Colonel Walker, a retired military officer, a man Jack had served alongside years ago. He approached Jack with a firm salute. "Sir," Colonel Walker said, his voice filled with respect. "It's been a while." Mark and his friends turned their heads in confusion. "Wait. You know this guy?" Dave asked. Colonel Walker's gaze shifted to the group of teens. "You have no idea who you're talking to, do you?" he said, his voice calm but filled with authority. "This man here? He's one of the finest soldiers this country has ever known." Mark looked at Colonel Walker, his mouth hanging open. "Wait, you're saying he's Jack Harris?" Colonel Walker interrupted. "Medal of Honor recipient. Served in Vietnam. Single-handedly saved his entire battalion under fire. That's who you've been mocking." The teens were silent. Mark's face went pale as realization dawned. The old man, the one they'd laughed at and underestimated, was a living legend. The strength they had so carelessly dismissed wasn't just physical, it was the kind of strength that comes from a lifetime of sacrifice, honor, and unyielding courage. Jack Harris didn't need to prove anything. The truth had been revealed, and it left the teens standing there, speechless and humbled, as the weight of their disrespect sank in. Jack simply smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. He had shown them what real strength meant. The group of teenagers stood frozen, their eyes locked on Colonel Walker as he continued to speak, the weight of his words sinking in. Jack Harris, the man they had mocked just moments before, was now a figure of respect. Mark, still in shock, struggled to find the words. He's really a Medal of Honor recipient? Mark asked, his voice shaky. Colonel Walker nodded solemnly. Yes, he is. And that medal represents not just a moment of bravery, but a lifetime of service, sacrifice, and strength you can't even begin to understand. The group remained silent, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily on them. Jack stood there, a quiet figure amidst the tension, his calm demeanor unshaken. As the minutes passed, the group began to realize that their initial judgment had been nothing but a misunderstanding. Jack's strength was not in his physical prowess, but in his character, his experiences, and the quiet confidence that came from having lived a life that most of them could never imagine. I didn't know, Mark muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know who you were. Jack turned slowly, his eyes softening as he looked at Mark and the others. It's not about who I am, he said, his voice low but clear. It's about what you choose to see in people. Strength isn't always visible on the outside. Sometimes, it's a quiet thing, buried deep within. It's what you do when no one is watching, what you hold onto when everything else seems lost. The group of teenagers exchanged uneasy glances, each of them feeling the sting of their earlier actions. Colonel Walker gave them a stern look, but his voice softened. Respect isn't something that can be earned in a moment. It's something you build over a lifetime. Jack has done that, and he doesn't need anyone to tell him who he is. Jack smiled slightly, his lips curving into a faint but knowing expression. It's all right, he said. You're young. You've got time to learn. The group of teens stood still, processing the lesson they had just learned in the most humbling way possible. It was one thing to hear about heroes and legends, but it was another entirely to meet one face to face and realize that the true strength they had mocked was the very thing they needed to learn. I'll make sure to remember this, Mark said finally, his voice tinged with regret. I hope you do, Jack replied, his gaze unwavering. But remember, the real strength isn't in the medals. It's in how you treat others, how you live your life. The teens nodded, still processing the weight of the words. As Jack turned to leave, they stood there in silence, watching him walk away, each of them silently vowing to carry a little piece of his strength with them moving forward. The moment had changed them, and they would never forget the quiet soldier who had shown them what real strength truly meant. The days that followed in the park were quiet, but the ripple from that moment continued to spread. The group of teenagers, once so full of their own bravado, had been changed. They saw the world differently now, no longer so quick to judge, and certainly more aware of the strength that lay hidden in those they had once dismissed. Mark, in particular, couldn't stop thinking about Jack Harris. He found himself replaying their encounter over and over in his mind, the old man's calm strength, the respect Colonel Walker had shown, and the quiet words of wisdom that had sunk deep into his soul. A week later, Mark found himself back at the park, sitting on the same bench where he had stood that day. It was a warm afternoon, and the sun hung lazily in the sky. The group of teens had returned, though this time, their energy was different, subdued, respectful. They weren't laughing or mocking, but sitting in silence, thinking. Mark spotted Jack across the park, walking slowly with a cane. Without hesitation, he stood up, walked over, and greeted him. Hey, Jack, Mark said, his voice softer than it had been before. I wanted to apologize for how we acted that day. I've been thinking about what you said, about strength. Jack turned slowly to face him, a gentle smile playing at the corners of his lips. It's all right, son, he replied. It's not about the apology. It's about understanding. Mark nodded, his eyes sincere. I understand now. I was wrong. I've learned a lot from you. Jack patted the seat next to him, inviting Mark to sit down. We all make mistakes, Jack said, his voice steady but kind. What matters is what we do after. Strength isn't just about physical ability, it's about the choices we make, how we stand up when life knocks us down. Mark sat down beside him, the weight of Jack's words sinking in. They sat together for a few moments, in comfortable silence, as the world around them continued to move on. The teens had gathered, their own thoughts shifting toward something deeper, something more meaningful than what had once seemed important. It was the kind of quiet reflection that only comes after realizing the true cost of strength and the lessons that can come from the most unexpected sources. As they sat there, Colonel Walker approached, his footsteps firm and respectful. "Jack," he said, nodding in recognition. "It's good to see you again." Jack turned toward him, his smile widening. "Good to see you too, Colonel," he replied. The two men exchanged a quiet understanding. Mark watched them, the realization dawning that Jack and Colonel Walker shared a bond that went beyond rank and medals. It was a bond of respect, forged in the fire of experience, and one that could never be broken. The group of teens stood up, one by one, walking over to Jack and Colonel Walker. Each of them nodded respectfully, offering their own silent apology, each understanding the gravity of the moment. They had learned something that could never be taught in a classroom or a gym. It was a lesson about true strength, about honor, and about the quiet power that comes from living a life of integrity. Jack Harris, the old soldier, had shown them what it meant to be truly strong. Not through words, but through his actions, his silence, and the strength of his character. And as the day wore on, the teens knew that they would carry that lesson with them for the rest of their lives. The weeks passed, and life in the park returned to its usual rhythm. However, for Mark and his friends, everything had shifted. The once carefree, mocking laughter had been replaced by a newfound respect, not just for Jack Harris but for the idea of strength itself. Mark found himself going back to the park regularly, not just to meet with the group, but to sit quietly and reflect, just as Jack had done. One afternoon, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Mark sat on the same bench where he had first approached Jack. He had learned a lot in the past few weeks, not just about physical strength, but about resilience, humility, and the power of inner strength. He looked up as he saw Jack walking toward him, his cane tapping softly against the pavement. Jack stopped in front of Mark and smiled, his eyes warm. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, his voice gentle. Mark stood up, stepping aside to let Jack sit. "Of course, Jack. It's good to see you again." They sat in silence for a moment, the sound of birds chirping in the distance and the rustling of leaves in the light breeze. Jack spoke first. "You've been thinking a lot, haven't you?" Mark nodded slowly. "Yeah, I have. I've been thinking about a lot of things, about strength, about life, and about how I used to see things." Jack chuckled softly. "It's funny, isn't it? How we go through life thinking we have it all figured out, only to realize that the real lessons come when we least expect them." Mark smiled, a sense of understanding between them. "I used to think strength was just about how much weight you could lift, how fast you could run. But now I know it's about more than that." Jack nodded in approval. "Strength is in how you handle the hard times, how you keep going when it seems like everything is falling apart. It's in the way you treat others, even when they don't deserve it." Mark looked down at his hands, remembering the day he had challenged Jack. "I wasn't the kind of person who understood that. I used to look at people like you, older, weaker looking, and I thought they didn't have anything to offer. But I was wrong." Jack placed a hand on Mark's shoulder, a firm yet gentle gesture. "We all have our moments of weakness, son. What matters is what we do with them. Do we let them define us, or do we rise above them?" Mark's eyes met Jack's, and for the first time, he felt the weight of the words sinking in deeply. "I get it now," he said softly. Jack smiled, the lines on his face softening with pride. "Good. You're learning. And that's the most important thing." They sat together for a while, the quiet between them comfortable, the kind of silence that spoke volumes. As the sun set lower, casting long shadows across the park, Mark knew that the lessons he had learned from Jack Harris would stay with him for the rest of his life. It wasn't just about lifting weights or proving strength. It was about proving to yourself that you could face whatever came your way, with dignity and grace, no matter how old you were, no matter how many times you had fallen. Jack had shown him that true strength wasn't measured in muscles or accolades, it was measured in the way you carried yourself through life, with honor and resilience. And Mark, for the first time, truly understood what it meant to be strong. The months passed, and Mark's perspective on life continued to shift. He found himself reflecting on the lessons Jack had taught him more often, especially on those quiet nights when he was alone with his thoughts. His friends had noticed the change too. Gone was the boy who scoffed at everything he didn't understand. Now, he listened more, observed more, and, most importantly, respected more. One afternoon, Mark decided to visit Jack again. It had been a few weeks since their last conversation, and he felt a deep need to check in, to share how much had changed within him. He made his way to the park, finding Jack sitting on the same bench they had shared that day. The park was quieter now, the leaves of autumn beginning to paint the trees with vibrant colors. Mark approached slowly, unsure of what to say. Jack noticed him coming and gave a small wave, the corner of his mouth turning up in a familiar smile. "Mark, good to see you, son," Jack said, his voice as steady as always. Mark sat beside him, feeling an immediate sense of peace. "Hey, Jack. I've been thinking a lot about everything, really." Jack raised an eyebrow, his gaze sharp yet kind. "That so? What's on your mind?" Mark paused, collecting his thoughts. I think I get it now. What you were talking about, strength, life, everything. I wasn't really living before. I was just going through the motions, thinking it was all about being tough, about showing off." Jack nodded, his eyes never leaving Mark's. It's easy to fall into that trap. Society tells us that strength is about showing power, looking tough, but that's only half the story. Real strength comes from the quiet moments, from being able to face what life throws at you without letting it break you. Mark looked down at his hands, the weight of Jack's words sinking deep. "I wasn't strong before. I thought I was, but now I know it wasn't real strength. I used to care about what people thought of me, and that made me hide who I really was. Now, I don't care anymore. I just want to be the best version of myself, not for anyone else, but for me." Jack's expression softened, and for the first time, Mark noticed the deep lines on his face weren't just signs of age but of wisdom earned through a lifetime of challenges. "That's the right mindset, son. Strength isn't about fighting others. It's about fighting the urge to give up, to quit on yourself, no matter what's thrown at you." Mark smiled, feeling lighter than he had in a long time. "I've been trying to be more like you, Jack. Calm. Resilient. You've been through so much, and you still stand tall. That's what real strength is." Jack chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I've had my share of struggles, but I'm no different from you, Mark. We all have our battles. The key is to keep pushing forward, even when it seems impossible. That's where the real growth happens." The two sat together in silence for a while, the world around them fading into the background. Mark realized how much Jack had impacted him, not just with words, but with the way he lived his life, quietly, humbly, and with a strength that could not be measured by any scale or weight. It wasn't about the medals or the accolades. It was about how Jack carried himself, how he treated others, and how he faced every day with the kind of resilience that made all the difference. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the park, Mark knew that he had truly learned the meaning of strength. Not the kind that comes from physical power, but the kind that comes from the heart, from facing life head-on, and never backing down. Jack had shown him that, and for that, Mark would be forever grateful. As winter arrived, Mark continued to make his way to the park every week. The air had grown crisp, and the trees stood bare, their leaves scattered on the ground. He had made it a routine to visit Jack, each visit leaving him with a new perspective, a new lesson. He felt a responsibility now, not just to be better for himself, but to pass on the lessons Jack had shared with him. One afternoon, as Mark sat waiting for Jack, he saw him approaching from across the park, walking slowly, his cane tapping gently on the pavement. The old man's steps had become slower over the months, but his presence was as strong as ever. Mark stood to greet him. "Hey, Jack," he said with a warm smile. "It's good to see you today." Jack looked up, his face lighting up with recognition. "You too, son," he replied, his voice calm and steady as always. They sat together on the bench, the park quieter than usual. Mark had been thinking a lot about their previous conversations, and there was something he needed to ask. "Jack," he started, his tone a little more serious than usual. "I've been reflecting on everything you've taught me, about strength and what it really means. And, well, there's something I've been struggling with. It's about making decisions." Jack turned to him, his eyes sharp as always. "Decisions, hey," he said thoughtfully. "What kind of decisions are you talking about?" Mark hesitated for a moment. "It's about what I do with my life. I'm at a point where I need to decide what I want my future to look like. I want to make the right choices, but I'm afraid of failing. What if I make the wrong move?" Jack sat back, his expression thoughtful. "Fear of failure is something everyone faces, Mark. But you can't let that fear control you. Decisions are part of life, but it's how you handle them that counts. It's not about always being right, it's about learning from what comes next. You can't always see the end of the road, but you can keep moving forward. That's the key." Mark nodded, the weight of Jack's words settling in. "So, you're saying it's okay to make mistakes?" Jack smiled softly. "Of course. Mistakes are a part of growth. The important thing is to never give up, no matter how many wrong turns you take. It's about finding the strength to keep going, to keep learning, and to keep moving forward even when things don't go as planned." Mark sat in silence, contemplating what Jack had said. He had always feared failure, thinking it would define him, but now he saw it differently. Failure wasn't the end, it was just another step on the journey. "Thanks, Jack," Mark said quietly. "You've given me a lot to think about." Jack gave him a nod, his eyes full of understanding. "That's all anyone can ask for, Mark. Just keep moving forward. Take each day as it comes, and make the best decisions you can. That's the real strength." As the afternoon sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Mark felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt before. He had spent so much of his life afraid of what was ahead, but now, with Jack's wisdom, he understood that the key to strength wasn't in avoiding failure, it was in having the courage to face it, learn from it, and continue moving forward. Jack had shown him that, just as he had shown him the true meaning of strength all those months ago. The park around them grew quieter, and Mark knew that no matter what came next, he was ready to face it, with the strength that came from within, and the wisdom that Jack had shared. As the months passed, Mark's visits to the park became more than just a way to reflect, they had become an essential part of his routine. He met Jack there almost every week, each visit helping him to further internalize the lessons Jack had taught him. The old soldier had become a symbol of quiet strength, and Mark's understanding of what it truly meant to be strong deepened with every conversation. One chilly afternoon, as the wind rustled through the trees, Mark sat on their usual bench, waiting for Jack. It was colder than usual, the air sharp with the bite of approaching winter. As he sat there, his thoughts drifted back to the moment when he had first met Jack, when he had been so quick to mock and dismiss the old man. He had come so far since then, learning that strength was not about outward appearances or bravado. Jack had shown him that true strength was a quiet resilience, an unwavering determination in the face of life's challenges. Mark's thoughts were interrupted when he saw Jack approaching, moving slowly but steadily with his cane. The sight of the old man still struck him with a sense of admiration. Despite his age and physical limitations, Jack carried himself with a dignity that Mark had come to respect deeply. Jack greeted him with a small, knowing smile as he sat down beside him. "Cold day today," Jack remarked, his breath visible in the crisp air. "Yeah," Mark replied. "But it feels good, kind of refreshing." Jack nodded. "Life can be like that sometimes. It can feel cold, harsh, but there's always something in it to help us grow." Mark glanced at Jack, his curiosity piqued. What do you mean by that? Jack's gaze softened, and he looked out at the park, where the fallen leaves scattered across the ground. Sometimes we have to face the hard stuff, the cold, the struggles, the things that seem unfair. But it's in those moments that we learn who we really are. It's in the hard times that we grow stronger. Mark thought about that for a moment. I guess that's what I've been trying to learn. I used to think strength was about winning, about getting everything right. But now I realize it's about how you handle things when they don't go the way you want. It's about keeping going even when it seems like everything is falling apart. Jack turned to him, a faint smile on his lips. Exactly. Strength isn't about always winning or always getting it right. It's about how you keep your head up, how you keep moving forward no matter what life throws your way. That's the kind of strength that lasts. Mark nodded slowly, feeling a sense of clarity wash over him. I've been facing some tough decisions recently, and I've been so worried about making the wrong choice. But I'm starting to understand that making mistakes is okay as long as I keep learning. Jack's eyes twinkled with approval. Mistakes are part of the journey. Don't be afraid of them. Be afraid of not trying, of standing still, of letting fear control your decisions. Mark let out a deep breath, feeling the weight of those words sink in. Thanks, Jack, he said, his voice quiet but sincere. I've learned more from you than I ever could have imagined. Jack smiled, his gaze steady. You've always had the strength in you, Mark. Sometimes, it just takes a little time to recognize it. The key is to keep going, to never stop learning, and to always hold your head up high. The two sat in silence for a while, the quiet of the park surrounding them, and Mark felt a deep sense of peace. He realized that Jack's lessons were more than just about being strong in the face of adversity. They were about living a life of integrity, of treating others with respect, and of always striving to be better, no matter the challenges ahead. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, Mark knew that he was ready for whatever came next. He had learned the true meaning of strength, not from lifting weights or facing physical challenges, but from the quiet wisdom of an old soldier who had lived through it all and still stood tall. Jack had shown him that strength wasn't just about what you could do, it was about who you were, and how you carried yourself in the face of life's trials. It was a few months after their last conversation when Mark found himself at a crossroads again. The lessons he had learned from Jack had shaped him in ways he hadn't anticipated, but now he was faced with a decision that seemed even more difficult than the ones he had struggled with before. He was applying for jobs, considering his future, and each choice felt like it carried so much weight. Sitting at the park one cool afternoon, Mark thought about how far he had come. He had gone from a young man full of uncertainty, driven by fear of failure, to someone who now understood that strength came from the ability to face challenges with grace and determination. Jack was sitting beside him, as always, his steady presence a reminder of everything he had learned. Jack, Mark said, his voice filled with hesitation. I've been thinking a lot about the future. I've got some job offers, but I don't know if I'm ready for the responsibility. What if I fail? What if I let people down? Jack looked at him with a calm expression, the lines on his face deepening with the wisdom of a lifetime. You're never truly ready, Mark, he said gently. That's the thing about life. It throws you into situations you can't predict, and no amount of preparation makes you immune to mistakes. But that's not the point. The point is to keep moving forward, even when you don't have all the answers. Mark sat in silence, absorbing Jack's words. The old soldier had lived through so much, and yet he spoke with such simplicity. There was a quiet strength in his words, and Mark realized that this was the very thing he had been missing, the understanding that uncertainty was part of life, and it didn't have to paralyze him. You told me once that real strength is about how we handle life when things don't go as planned, Mark said thoughtfully. But what if I'm not good enough? What if I fall short? Jack smiled, his eyes twinkling with the same quiet wisdom Mark had come to admire. You won't know until you try, son. And if you fall short, that doesn't mean you've failed. It means you've learned. Every step, every mistake, every challenge is an opportunity to grow. It's not about perfection, it's about progress. Mark looked out across the park, where the last remnants of autumn were giving way to the chill of winter. He had spent so much time worrying about being perfect, about avoiding mistakes, but now he saw that life wasn't about avoiding failure, it was about learning to face it with courage and resilience. "You've taught me so much, Jack," Mark said quietly, his voice thick with gratitude. "I don't think I could have come this far without you." Jack gave a small, humble shrug. "I've only shared what I've learned, son. You've done the hard work." Mark smiled, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. He wasn't alone in this anymore. Jack had shown him that strength wasn't just about individual power, it was about having the courage to lean on others, to learn, and to keep moving forward no matter the obstacles. With that, Mark stood up, feeling a sense of clarity he had never known before. "I think I'm ready now," he said, a new sense of confidence in his voice. "Ready to take that next step." Jack nodded, his face calm and proud. "That's the spirit. Just remember, the road ahead won't always be easy, but as long as you keep moving forward, you'll find your way." Mark turned and began to walk toward the future, knowing that he would face whatever came next with strength, resilience, and the wisdom that Jack had shared with him. It wasn't about having all the answers, but about having the courage to keep going, step by step, no matter what life threw his way. As the years passed, Mark found himself in a place he had never imagined, standing at the threshold of his future, ready to take on new challenges. His visits to the park with Jack had become less frequent, but the lessons remained firmly etched in his heart. He was no longer the young man who feared failure, who avoided challenges because of the unknown. He had embraced the lessons Jack had shared. Strength wasn't about perfection, it was about progress. It was about the courage to keep going, even when things seemed difficult. Mark's life had taken a new direction. He had found a job that excited him, one that challenged him in ways he never expected. It was a job where he could make a difference, and for the first time in his life, he felt like he was living with purpose. But even with this new chapter, Mark never forgot Jack. He made a promise to himself that he would visit the park as often as he could, to check in with the man who had taught him so much. On one particular afternoon, as winter began to settle in, Mark made his way to the park. The air was crisp, and the sun was just starting to set, casting long shadows across the ground. He spotted Jack sitting on their usual bench, a slight smile on his face as he noticed Mark approaching. "You're looking good, son," Jack said with a nod, his voice warm and steady as always. Mark smiled and sat beside him, feeling a sense of calm settle over him. "I'm doing well, Jack," he replied. "Everything's been going great. I'm starting to see what you meant about facing things head on. Life's been throwing challenges my way, but I'm not afraid of them anymore." Jack's eyes twinkled with pride. "I'm glad to hear that," he said, his voice calm and steady. "You've come a long way, Mark. I knew you had it in you." Mark sat back and took a deep breath, his gaze focused on the trees around them. The park had changed over the years, just as he had. "I've been thinking a lot about everything you've taught me," Mark said, his voice thoughtful. "And I've realized that it's not just about facing challenges, it's about being true to yourself, no matter what others think. I spent so much time trying to fit into a mold, trying to be what everyone else expected. But now, I'm focused on being the best version of myself." Jack nodded slowly, his expression serious but proud. "That's the key, son. Strength comes from within. When you learn to trust yourself and live with integrity, nothing else matters. You're not living for anyone else, you're living for you. And that's the kind of strength that lasts." Mark's heart swelled with gratitude. "You've given me so much to live by, Jack," he said quietly. "I don't think I could ever thank you enough for all the lessons." Jack smiled, his gaze softening. "You don't have to thank me, Mark. You've always had the strength inside you. All I did was help you see it." The two sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun dip lower in the sky. Mark realized that the old soldier's wisdom had become a part of him, guiding him in every decision he made. He wasn't just facing challenges anymore, he was embracing them, knowing that every step forward, no matter how small, was part of his journey. The park, now quiet and still, felt like a place of reflection, a place where Mark could come to recharge and reconnect with the lessons that had shaped his life. Jack had taught him that strength wasn't about winning or always being right, it was about the courage to face life's obstacles with dignity and the resilience to keep moving forward, no matter what. As the evening grew darker, Mark knew that his journey was far from over. But he was ready for whatever came next. With Jack's wisdom in his heart, he knew he could face anything, with strength, humility, and an unwavering belief in himself.